Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I'm your host as usual, and obviously, welcome back to the show. Today's episode 260 of the show, and before we get started, we're just going to do a little bit of house quick around here because it only makes sense that we do it. So let's get on with the house cleaning. I do want to say thank you guys for coming back and listening to today's episode. It does mean a lot to me. You guys constantly take time of your days to download episodes, to share these episodes, to constantly keep letting me know how you feel, whether you like my stupid face or not, you like my opinions or not. At the end of the day, you are greatly appreciated, and I greatly appreciate your feedback when it comes to the show because let's be real, without you guys, well, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of this stuff. Let's just be honest here. I do want to say thank you as well for the Patreon backers for supporting the show as well. You guys are greatly appreciated. And I do also want to acknowledge that we didn't do an episode last week, even though we talked about like coming back to a more consistent schedule with the show, which I'm going to be honest with y'all. Yeah, things did happen because, well, if you guys aren't aware, we did begin to transition into my career. So obviously that meant I haven't done the show in a little bit due to the fact of traveling for work. And then last week started my first, actual official week of work. And it definitely took, it took me to put the show at least a little bit on the back burner just so we can get a little bit comfortable with the work cycle. And then we can properly fit in, doing the show and everything like that. But I do also want to admit that I'm kind of glad that we didn't because of the fact that we haven't done an episode in a little bit due to the fact that the news has just been crazy, if I'm being honest with you. And that's why, with so many things happening, we wanted to focus in on probably the most important topic going on right now. And it's related to the whole debacle, or in this case, the most disastrous launch of an iPhone in a very long time, where people are comparing this to the Note 7. If you guys aren't familiar with the Note 7, was a phone that Samsung came out with a pretty long time ago. I say pretty long time ago, but like a couple of years ago, where the phone was great. It was praised as one of the greatest phones that came out during that time period, but it had one very, very, very jarring flaw, which was the battery was, the battery was not the best and it caused the phone to explode. And so it led to this huge PR nightmare for Samsung that they eventually recovered. But again, it still doesn't look good on your brand if your phone is exploding and airlines are banning you from having this phone on a plane. And so it's just like, ugh, So what am I talking about? We talk about the iPhone 15 disastrous launch. You're like, Josh, how is it disastrous? When the phone is sold out, you see online, the phone is sold out everywhere. Everyone's like, the cameras are amazing, the performance is amazing. And yeah, we do agree on that. Let's not sit here and pretend that it's all gloom and doom. But we do have to address the elephant in the room, which is the negative criticisms that come with this launch, which are, one, the durability concerns, and two, the thermal throttling concerns. Because again, while we may sit here and agree that the phone as a whole package may be great, there are still some jarring flaws here that need to be addressed. And this has been a recurring pattern with Apple, especially when we look at the current advancements in their chiplets. But what are we going to talk about specifically? Like I said, let's talk about the concerns that have arisen during this launch, and then how could these concerns be remedied going forward. So I think starting with like the smaller ones first, which would be repairability of the device. Yes, it is common knowledge that if you follow right to repair, if you follow like iFixit and their teardowns or breakdowns of phones and rate them based on the repairability, that, yeah, it has been common knowledge that the iPhone 15 is now more repairable than, say, the iPhone 14 and iPhones previously. But because of that, they have now added more software limitations where, unless you get it, well, the phones may be easier to repair, which is a good thing. We want our devices to be more easily repairable, and that users should have the choice of who or how they want to repair their device. The problem is when you include DRM and you basically put software locks in place that prevents you from using third-party parts or even allowing people that are not considered authorized repair specialists for Apple or Apple products, services, whatever, then you basically just took one step forward and then like 20 backwards. So it's like, it's progress, but it's also not progress at the same time. So it's like, it's a good win. The fact that we got what we wanted, which was more easily repairable iPhones. The problem now comes in that they're putting all these software locks in place so that you can't just go to whoever you want to repair them, or do it yourself, which sucks. So that's one concern that has currently arisen because of this situation. Now we need to talk about the bigger elephants in the room, which are the durability concerns and the thermal throttling. And I want to talk about the thermal throttling a little bit, just because I do see why it is very concerning that the thermal situation in these iPhones have not been properly dealt with, or Apple did not go the extra mile to implement better cooling solutions, or even implement a cooling solution to begin with to cool these chips, given the advertising and the marketing behind these phones. If you don't believe me, the A17 Pro chip, the newest chip inside of the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, has been advertised to run AAA games on a smartphone. The first time that this has ever been done. And it's funny because they advertise all this and they're like, oh yeah, these get Resident Evil 4, bro, Resident Evil Village, we got all these banger games on here, brother. I'm telling you, brother, you guys just don't understand. Your third eye isn't awoken. But that's all fine and dandy. But the problem is like, that's like putting a Ferrari engine in a Mini Cooper. It's not necessarily going to go well because the Mini Cooper does not have the proper cooling to be able to maintain an engine like that. And as we have seen with reports and as testing has been done, the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max do overheat very, very quickly. They will thermal throttle in about 2 minutes flat just by using the phone. And the thermal throttling does reduce performance on the GPU and CPU by about 25% in just 2 minutes. And so this is why people were concerned when they were watching games like Genshin Impact stutter on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max when it's never done that before on other iPhones. And this is a concern that people have had, or a criticism people have had of Apple when they started implementing these faster and faster chips, is that while you can do that, and that should be promoted, and you should be, pushing the boundaries of what you can do with your smartphone, that also should come with, instead of making your phone thinner, you should be making them maybe thicker and implementing cooling solutions to help keep these phones cool. It's what we saw with the Snapdragon phones, or primarily Android phones that came out with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 was notorious for thermal throttling because it was a very hot chip. That wasn't an issue with the Snapdragon 888, 875, 865. Like, it wasn't an issue before. But now with the Gen 1, there was those thermal throttling issues, and that's why it got resolved in the 8 Gen 1 Plus, where they obviously refined the process, but also phones implemented a better cooling solution to help keep the phones cool. That's why we see with the N 2, again, more proper implementation of the chip, upgrading where it needed to be, better efficiency, at the same time, better cooling solutions. There's a reason why you see Samsung phones with vapor chambers, OnePluses with vapor chambers. You see phones like the Asus ROG phones, like peak gaming phones that run these chips at overclocked speeds and have cooling solutions to keep them cool, because they know that if you don't, these chips will thermal throttle. And if you're trying to promote a no compromise experience with your phone when it comes to performance, I don't think thermal throttling is living up to that promise. And the same thing goes for if you were to use, say, like a Core i9. Like, let's look at the Core i9s, for example. the Core i9 12900K and then the 13900K. Yes, well, these are processors that draw a lot of wattage and will run very hot. There is a reason why you have to invest good money into good cooling solutions for these processors. Yes, will they still thermal throttle? Yes, they still will, because they just pull too much wattage, bro. Like, unless you're putting this thing under liquid nitrogen, they're not going to stay cool. But at least you can minimize the effects of the thermal throttling, where you're not losing as much performance, but it's still running hot. Now, granted, if you were to use some cheap $20 cooler, I highly doubt it's going to be able to keep those suckers cool. Let's just be honest here. It will still do something. It's better than nothing, but we're not going to sit here and pretend like it's going to do the same job as like a premium high quality air cooler, a 360 millimeter AIO, which is probably recommended for those suckers because of how much power and how much heat they generate. But the point stands when you look at the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, that these phones, or specifically this chiplet, does not have any sort of vapor chamber. It doesn't have, it's more passive cooling. And as we have seen, this does not work. And especially with the change in materials, this certainly is not going to work, because you clearly see the phone is overheating. And yes, we can sit here and say, yes, a lot of people are still not experiencing this issue. There are some people that generally don't experience this, and that is valid. We're not going to sit here and say that these phones, everyone is going to experience the exact same thing, because that is clearly not the case, because everyone's use cases are going to be vastly different. But we should still acknowledge the reality, which is this is a clear issue. Let's pretend, we can't just say, oh, just because I don't experience this does not mean this is not an issue. No, we still address this as an issue that should be investigated and to understand why this is happening. Now, on a physics level and as an engineering standpoint, we know why this is happening. It's because these phones were not built with cooling chambers for this chip, because the chip runs hot. And then in the materials that it's used to, well, put around it, the case that it's inside of is now this new titanium shell. Clearly, it's running hot. This doesn't surprise me. This is expected. This is what happens, and why people have warned Apple, you need to start implementing cooling chambers in these phones, vapor chambers, like some form of cooling solution to help maintain the temperature of these chiplets. Because yes, you want them to run faster, you want them to go above and beyond in terms of performance in a smartphone, but there is always going to be that limitation, which is heat. And yes, heat is the primary problem. If you can't keep it cool, it doesn't matter how fast your thing can go. It's not going to be able to maintain that consistently. That's what people want. They want consistency. They don't want just short bursts. Short bursts are great for benchmarks. They are not great for long-term usability. This also doesn't help that these phones are overheating, and it's leading to battery degradation, which doesn't surprise me how these phones will look in a year in terms of battery life for a lot of people. If the batteries are going to degrade much faster, even though yes, there are software implementations inside of iOS 17 that help with charging, like, you know, primarily the charging your phone to 80% and doing that to help preserve battery life or the longevity of your battery. But because these phones are generating so much heat, I don't even think that's going to play a factor. But again, we have to revisit this in a year's time and see where are these phones at in terms of battery life and the health of those batteries. But we can acknowledge the reality of these phones thermal throttling. That is just the objective facts, whether you like it or not. You can't argue it, because this is facts. These are factual things. These are things that can be tested, that can be replicated. If it can be replicated, there is something clearly wrong here. And I hope that going forward, Apple will realize, hey, we should implement some form of cooling solution instead of just trying to make these phones thinner. Making them thinner is not a good idea. We should be making them a little bit thicker to implement the proper solutions that are needed for these phones. Because if you want them to run like Ferraris, you can't be putting them in Mini Cooper bodies, because it's not gonna work, bro. It's not how physics work. Physics says you need to dissipate this heat. If you don't, it is going to end really, really badly. And it's gonna be surprising. I'm not saying I want this to happen, but if an iPhone were to randomly blow up because of these heat issues, it is not going to surprise me if Apple is going to pull a huge 180 and then find some way to implement better cooling solutions. Because again, if it's going to take a phone blowing up on them to realize, like, hey, you need to cool these phones better, or something bad is really going to happen, then so be it. But I digress. Now, the second concern that people have is the durability. Yes, we are well aware of the marketing that they hype it up as this new titanium body, this new all glass back that makes it easier to repair. That's why you see the pricing. If you've seen the pricing for repairs right now for iPhones, the 15 Pro is far cheaper to repair than say the 14 Pro and et cetera, et cetera. But if you haven't seen the video from Jerry Rig Everything, that it has been exposed that these phones are very fragile in comparison to the phones prior, the 14 Pro, Pro Max series, that we have seen countless tests of people just barely dropping them on carpet, barely dropping them from like a foot, and they're instantly shattered. Or prime example, Jerry Rig Everything, like barely applying the minimal amount of pressure into a spot on the back, like just a, if you've seen the video, essentially applying, the normal durability test that other phones haven't cracked or anything, but the fact that the iPhone, just by applying minimal pressure, instantly cracked the back is very concerning. Now, obviously, yes, we can sit here and say, well, these are outliers, these are extreme situations, no one's doing this to their phone. And yeah, you may be right. We do have a point here. No one's gonna go out of their way to just start bending their phone. Let's be real here. No one's gonna do that. But it's the fact that it was done with so minimal force. It'd be different if it was like a C-bum, like doing that to a phone. Of course that thing's gonna crack. It's friggin' C-bum, But if it's just like someone like Jerry, where, Jerry Ray everything, yeah, he's still a pretty big dude. He's probably a little bit jacked. I'm like, but the fact that it was with so minimal, it was not even him trying like really hard, because you can clearly see when he's actually trying. Like clearly he could do that and far worse. But it's the fact that it was done with so minimal effort does raise concerns for the material of this phone, that it's like, well, it's very fragile. That's why people are saying like you should be getting Apple Care. It's even recommended by, like, it's been coming out that Apple stores are recommending people to get Apple Care for these phones because of XYZ issues, thermal throttling issues that could probably lead to issues with the battery down the road, durability concerns, heck, even a lot of the accessories that are with this iPhone. People are recommending to look at other cases, third party or just Apple Silicon cases, because of the fact that it just feels like this launch is a recipe for disaster. Like, yes, these phones are sold out and back ordered to like October, November, and that's fine. But I feel like once people start getting their hands on these devices, we're going to start seeing a different tone. And we're going to start seeing people complaining more and more about the thermal issues, that these phones are running very hot, that they're burning people's hands. Like, now, granted, that's more of an extreme one, burning people's hands. Like, can it happen? Yeah, it can happen because heat is heat. It's just physics. But the durability concerns are going to be a big issue going forward, especially if these phones are barely just, if they're already cracking just with a minimal issue. And you see people that like putting their phones in their back pocket. Imagine people that don't have a case and put this in their back pocket. Like, what happens if they pull it out and their phone's like cracked just by sitting, and it kind of leads to concerns, because people are like, oh, well, I want to raw dog my phone, I don't want to have a case on it. Well, homie, like, let's be real, with these phones, you're kind of gonna need it, because these phones are very fragile for some ungodly reason. Like, I feel more confident walking around with my Z Fold 5 and raw dogging this thing than I do raw dogging a 15 Pro and Pro Max, because I don't see this thing cracking like those things. And it's just like, to me, it's concerning on how this even made it out of the factory. Like, did they not even think about this? Like, to be honest, when they were researching and developing, like testing this in situations, like, oh yeah, like no one's gonna like apply just a minimal amount of pressure and it's gonna crack the whole back. Like, no, like, guys, how did this even make it out of the lab? Like, what? Like, this is the concerns that I have with the 15 Pro and Pro Max, is that I think we're gonna look back at this as a terrible iPhone launch. Which is sad to say, because yes, this was a quote unquote, a big jump. It was a change in direction for Apple, implementing USB-C, even though, yeah, the USB-C situation is a whole different ball game, that Apple's stingy, especially with how they design their cases, which don't even get me started. The whole cases, that new like vegan material, whatever bullcrap they decided to make with these new cases, are complete garbage, just terrible. Don't buy them. They're just absolutely terrible. One, the cases aren't durable. Two, the cases are made from very cheap material. Three, the cases stain very easily and they don't last long. Like, barely just after a day, they are already like ugly and gunky. I'm like, yeah, no, avoid buying those things like the plug. Go buy some third-party cases. But it's the fact that this launch was anticipated, especially with the new performance, the camera fixes, like actually fixing the camera, which was a big issue with the 14 Pro because they implemented the new sensor and they didn't properly calibrate it. There was a reason why it had autofocusing issues, inconsistent with the colors, inconsistency with the focus, and now that has been remedied with this new 15 Pro and Pro Max series. But again, we still fall with the same situation of these issues. The thermal situation shouldn't have been an issue to begin with. This should have been dealt with in testing. If this went out the door after testing it, there's clearly something wrong. They did not properly test these phones. At the same time, the durability. Why did this get greenlit, guys? Like, what were y'all thinking? Like, I get it. You want to make these things luxury pieces, like it's a status symbol and things like that. But it's like, they should at least be durable, and I shouldn't have to be sitting here relying on a case to protect my phone. And heck, the case, I don't even know if the case will protect it because of how fragile these things are. That's an even bigger concern. Like, bro, these cases better be made of like Nokia 3310 durability, bro. Like, I could drop this from a helicopter from 5,000 feet in the air and it's still gonna be fine. But these are the concerns that people have, and they're real concerns. Yes, we can acknowledge the fact that not everyone is going to stress test their phone like this. Not everyone's going to run into these thermal issues like this, and that is fine. We're not going to sit here and say that those situations aren't valid, that they aren't real, but we should also acknowledge the concerns that are very real, that are documented and can be replicated time and time again, that, hey, maybe, just maybe, they could do something differently to remedy the situation, because it is unacceptable that these premium flagship phones are coming out at these prices and dealing with these very serious issues that is not justifiable for a product of this price caliber. That doesn't make sense. Just because it's Apple doesn't mean we should justify poor behavior. The same thing was said with the MacBook Pros, with the trash keyboards back in the day. The same thing can be said with these iPhones right now, with the thermal issues and the poor design and durability, that we should not be settling for good enough. We should be pushing these companies and giving them harsh feedback that, hey, there is clearly something wrong. This needs to be resolved, whether it be in software updates, and if it can't be resolved in software, this should be resolved in the next phone. Point blank, period. Apple can, especially with the processors, Apple cannot go down this rabbit hole of promoting top tier quality, performance, but you only get it for like a minute. That is not acceptable. We should be getting consistent performance at a consistent time. There is a reason why the MacBooks have cooling systems, except the Air. But like the Pro and everything, there's a reason why people have the fans and everything. There's a reason why my 14-inch Pro has a cooling system. There's a reason why the 16-inch has a cooling system. There's a reason why the Mac Studio has a cooling system. There's a reason why the Mac Pro has a cooling system. If you're going to run high-end chips, they require proper cooling. You cannot just rely on all passive. These things need to be properly cooled. Get over it. I understand they probably want to make these phones slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. I'm like, guys, I get that. That is not the way, especially if you're trying to push performance. Passively cooling these things is not going to work. They need cooling systems. We're not saying to put a fan in these things, bro. We're saying put a vapor cooling chamber or something of that like, or even, hey, make up something new exclusive to Apple. Do that. Like, just go off the deep end of the pool and actually innovate, and that would be fine. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you going to be picking up an iPhone 15 Pro, 15 Pro Max, or even just the regular 15, 15 Plus? Like, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you guys even interested in these iPhones? Are you concerned about the durability and the thermal performance and all the other things going around with this wacky launch of this phone? Then hey, let me know in the comments down below. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I hope you found this episode very informative, very useful, and as we spark a conversation, because again, this should be a continued conversation. And again, we should also make it clear, we're not trying to be Apple haters or anything like that. No, give praise where praise is due, but also provide constructive criticism where there needs to be criticism, and how can we improve for the future going forward. This is the whole point of these conversations. People aren't just doing this just to bash Apple, and granted, there will be people that will do that. Let's be real. There will be people that will just do it just to get the clicks, to get the views. But no, We want to provide constructive criticism and explain the concerns that customers are having with these devices in the real world, not tested environments, in the real world using them. And so that we could provide that constructive criticism so that these situations can be avoided the next time. That is what we're trying to do. We can't change we can't change what's going on right now, but we can at least affect the future. Because again, the past is the past, but you can only affect the future. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I hope this episode was valuable to you in some way. Again, I do apologize because of the fact that we haven't done the episodes in about 2 weeks because again, busy with work. But I do appreciate you guys' patience with me. I really, really do appreciate it. I hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Please be safe, guys, and don't do anything dumb. And I will see you guys next week. Bye, guys.
Hey there, thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.